Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the BFG Podcast. Today it is a pleasure to sit down with former All Black, former Highlander, former Black Cat, among many other things, and host of the breakdown, Jeff Wilson. Welcome to the show, Jeff. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks very much, Blake. You started with a lot of formers. I'm a lot of former things. That's just the way we are now. The older they get, all of a sudden there's a lot more things I've been a part of. But look, I'm looking forward to the chat. We can take it in any direction you like. So let's get going.
So let's start with we'll start at the cricket. So you are famous for being one of the original code officers Canada used. So, with you going to cricket and then rugby, do you see any potential for that to happen in the future? Because we've seen with a black crash in recent years that there are some very talented rugby players that are currently out there that could easily play cricket. You've got Will Jordan, you've got Geordie Barrett, to name a couple. There are some potential there. So do you see potential for players to do what you did?
I think it's an interesting question, and you know, I would probably say before T20 came along, I think you'd probably say no, it's more than unlikely. But now I think because of the nature of the T20 game, we're seeing it in the Black Clash. You're seeing the ability of some of these guys who have played cricket growing up, who are good enough and talented enough to play the sport again, maybe at the end of their careers. For example, we saw it this year with Kieran Reid. The fact that he was a talented cricketer, he took a long time away from the game. Obviously, continued a bit of backyard, but I think it's well and truly possible that someone could cross back over. In fact, I'm be surprised and I'll be disappointed if one of the provinces across New Zealand that plays in the provincial competition in T20 doesn't look at that and go, you know what? If I was wanting to bring fans into the grounds, if I was to entertain, why wouldn't you give Kieran Reid an opportunity? Man, he's hitting Shane Bond, and Bondy wasn't bowling slow the other day. He was hitting it all over the park. So I'd like to think that someone gets the opportunity, whether it is a Will Jordan in the off season, to play in the condensed form of the game. And you know, there's no doubt athletically they're good enough in the field. I'd like to see it happen. Is it possible at the international level? Why not? There's always, I think, a first time for everything, and it would be the first time because the T20 game has changed international cricket. So I'm hopeful, Blake, that some of these talented guys who tasted cricket growing up, they give it a crack, and there's a vision from somebody else to give them the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this to be kind here, but Will Jordan and Geordie Barrett are phenomenal cricket players.
And they are. They're a talent. You're right. And you can just see that there's a natural ability there, and obviously the all-round ability of a Geordie Barrett. And you're seeing that, though. New Zealand, it's the nature of growing up is in summer you roll your arm over it, in winter you play rugby. Now, of course, there are other sports that are taking centre stage, and the likes of a basketball are getting more and more popular. And, you know, I think there's going to be challenges around it. But as you've just said, you can see the natural ability of these individuals. But it's not that they're new to the sport. They've played a lot of cricket. They've had a lot of nets over time. You know, there's always, you know, people who have crossover across a number of sports, not just whether it be cricket and rugby. So, you know, those two guys at the moment, though, however, are on the top of their game on the rugby field, and I'd like them to focus well and truly on that because that helps the All Blacks be better. And for me at the moment, you know, I can see and understand why they'd be focused on doing that.
And finally, on this segment, because you don't sort of see that you wouldn't think they would have a lot of arm power with the way they play rugby. So it really, really shocked me over the past few years as we keep saying that they can hit a six and they have enough power to do that, because I will never be able to do that myself, of course, being in a chair, but, you know, I can't speak for myself, but,
Yeah.
you know, having power, I'm told, takes a lot of skill to do, so, you know, it's not an easy thing that they're doing.
I think the one thing, like, it's probably more about timing for them. I mean, they're immensely strong, but all of a sudden the mechanics of cricket and rugby are so very, very different physiologically, and that's what I found when I went back to cricket after being a rugby player for 10 years, and not rolling the arm over anywhere near as much, and you're not working on the specific movements around moving your feet when I was batting and all those sorts of things. So there was a different stress on the body. So I don't know if power would be their issue. I think in the end, a lot of it is about timing and coordination and that ability to get that right. But you saw, like you say, that natural ability, that hitting ability, I think is one of the things that maybe you don't lose. I mean, let's be honest. I hear Geordie Barrett can bash a golf ball as far as anyone. He has that natural coordination. So, I don't think the power is necessarily a problem, but just the timing and the natural abilities to see and hit a ball that's all of a sudden moving is something that would maybe take a little bit of time to get back into. But, like I say, when they're remarkable athletes and sportsmen like they are, you get the sense and confidence they have the ability to do it.
And, one thing I forgot to mention is I know you're not in this deal, but there's a lot of talk about them both going to maybe have a go at league. Would you like, even though as a rugby analyst you wouldn't like to see them leave rugby, is that something you'd be open to watching to see if they could do a third sport just for the fan inside you?
Yeah, it's an interesting that dynamic because we know the impact Sonny Bill Williams had across a number of sports, and all of a sudden the following that has attracted and his ability now in the boxing ring is testing him in different ways. And so I suppose I think now a lot of that code hopping was more about, I suppose, the financial side of the game, whereas these guys are very much the typical All Black rugby player. We've got a few guys who have mentioned in the past. Obviously, Adi Savi has talked about maybe if he ever touched on the rugby league. TJ Perenara, maybe that's just a Hurricanes thing. Maybe that's the way they look at it in the game. But I think I'd like to stick. I'd like to see them stay with it. I'd like to see them, become those greats of the game of rugby union because they have that sort of talent level that if they're able to perform like they have performed in the last 12 months, and they've both been amazing. I'm a little bit biased, Blake. I prefer the game of rugby union. I'd like for these talented players to stay, and the more we have, the better.
So do you think that, while we're on the subject, do you think that TJ was close to going to the Roosters?
I think it was a real conversation. You have to trust TJ Perenara on his word. The fact that he went down that path and he looked at his future and he questioned where his desire was, and he still felt as though he had challenges in New Zealand rugby. And I don't doubt that he would be, I think, a successful rugby league player. But that still wouldn't have been an easy switch. It's not it's still fundamentally it's a similar game, but it's in a lot of ways vastly different. And you can take none of these things for granted. The other side of it too is, it would be the pressure. There's pressure on being an All Black, but then you take that pressure and expectation across to another sport and into that environment. We would all eyes would be on TJ Perenara, as it was for Benji Marshall, right? When Benji Marshall came and played for the Blues, that was an intense amount of scrutiny. Same, not quite the same pressure on Roger Tuivasa-Sheck coming to rugby union because there's a history there that we're well aware of at school, but there's still that, I suppose, lingering in the background is it possible to take it from one sport back to another, excuse me, and play to the highest level? And that's what makes so much of it intriguing when you hear TJ Perenara possibly might go to rugby league. You're going, where does he fit? Where does he play? Could he be successful? He would obviously weighed that up, and he felt there were still things in rugby he wanted to achieve, and maybe this is his next challenge.
We might circle back to the modern players at the end of this interview when we get to if we get to the breakdown. But well, let's start with your first stint in cricket. So that was the early 90s, before I was born. And then you did that for a couple of years, played a few of the different formats, then played a host of games for Otago, Highlanders, and then All Blacks, and then you went back to cricket at the tail end of your sporting career. So, as we start with the earlier stint in cricket, what was your favourite thing about that time?
Oh, look, I mean, I was very, very fortunate to play with some really experienced cricketers down in Dunedin and for Otago and for Southland as well. And I grew up in a cricket club. So, I mean, I think that's where I always thought, Blake, my future would be as a cricketer. But when I say future, it was more about me competing to the highest level I possibly could. And so my favourite part of that was as a young man getting opportunities to challenge myself against some of the best. And it was very similar back then as it is now. A lot of the international cricketers were quite often away with the New Zealand side, so they weren't in the domestic game all the time, but every so often they'd come back in. And then as a young man, I was not only being challenged by what was happening, say, in Southland cricket, I was getting challenged in what was the Hawke Cup, which was the provincial, the minor associations, and then all of a sudden I'm playing for Otago. And so there was all these different levels with different challenges, and I had different roles. And so then that whole ascension to getting an opportunity to play for the Black Caps was so far, it was so much out of the blue. I had no idea I was going to get an opportunity in '93 to play against Australia. It sort of came from nowhere. I had a pretty good season. We'd been really competitive, but circumstances led to me getting a chance. And, all of a sudden I'm rolling up against Dean Jones and the War Brothers and, remarkable cricketers, Merv Hughes, and I'm going to myself, hold on, Shane Warne, what am I doing here? And so all of a sudden it was a whirlwind experience. And not only was I playing against the world-class cricketers, I'm in the same changing room as Mark Greatbatch and Martin Crowe and Danny Morrison and this remarkable Andrew Jones, a remarkable group of people. And so I'm sort of, it's honestly, there was an amount of wow factor, but also I've got to try and go out there and compete. And it was sort of a whirlwind 2 weeks. It just, bam, it was gone. Before I know it, I played 4 one-day internationals against Australia. We'd lost the series on the last ball of a 5-match series, the last ball of a game at Eden Park. We had Gavin Larson needed to hit a 6 to win, and we didn't quite get there. And it was a remarkable 2 weeks. It was the most insane time. And I look back at it and go, boom, it was gone. And before I knew it, that sort of there was a period of about 3 or 4 years, Blake. It was crazy. You're sort of going from one level to the next as quick as it's all happening, and all of a sudden you get a game for New Zealand, and as quick as that all happened, the rugby opportunity or the rugby exposure changed when I went to Dunedin, and there was a whole new different challenge, and then that was sort of gone. It was remarkable. So look, I was grateful for all of that. I thought that was a fantastic experience. Excuse the dog. There's obviously someone outside. But it was a remarkable experience, something I look back on and go, it was almost hard to believe that it happened, and I was fortunate enough too to hit the winning runs in a game. Like, I would never have even envisaged that. And then, to have done that on a stage like that, it was in Hamilton, and all of a sudden the expectations just went to a different level. So it was a crazy time. That whole sort of 2 or 3 year period, it just snowballed to an opportunity to play for the Black Caps.
And so, how so are you saying that in the early period when you were doing the first stint of the cricket, you were sort of a young man that was starstruck by the players like Shane Warne, etc. Now, I will admit that I wasn't alive at the fifth point, right? And I didn't get into other sport until much later so I'll be 24 in November, and I didn't get into much sport until about a decade ago. So only got the opportunity to go back and watch your cricket stuff and some of your old rugby stuff because of the old catalogue they were showing during the first lockdown here in New Zealand for the coronavirus.
Yeah. And so it's a big, and that's the thing. It's, it's very, very different now, right, in terms of how people consume and you can find the legacy. And I suppose YouTube's a huge part of it. I mean, it's fascinating you talk about it because a lot of, kids who see me at the moment when I'm on television, right? And but reality is they don't really know who I am and what I did before that. And that's the only way they get that experience is sort of on YouTube. They're just that's that guy that's on the TV who works on the rugby. And I suppose it's how the legacy and the stories are told now, and that's part of our job is to try and keep that legacy of these players alive because we very much live in the here and the now. And I must admit, look, a lot of that old stuff through lockdown, through when you're watching old footage of games of rugby or whether it be cricket, it was almost like it was a trip down memory lane for a lot of people. But like you're saying for yourself, in those early days, there's things that you would never seen before. And so that all of a sudden there's this, you can go, oh, that's what that player did and that's who that player was. And, that's how they impacted the game. And, that's one thing that's really, really important about all of our sport is that, all of our New Zealand sport has a legacy, right? And it's just a matter of we've still got to keep connecting the dots. Where were the dots before me and who was the, it's like Sir John Kirwan was the dot before, I was. And then, all of a sudden there's a Doug Howlett comes along and there's just that legacy across the, all of these wonderful sports and wonderful teams. And it's a privilege to be a link in that chain, if you know what I mean, to have been a person as a part of that.
Yeah, because as I said, for me, I wasn't even alive during that first cricket period, and I didn't even start watching cricket to the tail end of Brendan McCullum's career. So to be able to go and see what you guys did in the early days was quite fascinating.
Well, watching me bowl half volleys, I'm not sure that's as fascinating, Blake. It's something I got really good at.
Yeah. So then after the cricket, you transitioned into. I hope I haven't missed anything on the timeline here. You transitioned into your stint at rugby, and that lasted for a large portion of your earlier adult life.
Yeah,
How
and it was
transitioning from cricket into the rugby for the first time.
Well, it was sort of. I mean, I'm very, very lucky. I had the benefit of playing in the amateur and professional era, and so between those two, I could very much experience what it was when it was at its simplest. You trained after work, you played on the weekend. It was very much a different game, and so that transition between one to the other. Once again, like '93 was it was an insane year. Like start of the season, I played in March. I played. Against Australia in one-day cricket. What did I then do? 6 months later, I'm on tour with the All Blacks. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world has this happened? And that's all through opportunity. That's all through, seeing and being seen by the right people. And like I said, this snowball effect happened that I go from being, and I'm still a young man, 19 years old, sort of going to Dunedin, studying, trying to build, I suppose the next phase because I went to go to teachers college. So there was nothing professional about what I was doing. I was making a little bit of money. Cricket was professional, but I was making a little bit of money. So I think the key for me was then I then transitioned through and all of a sudden the right people saw me. I was playing for a really fun Otago team. We were on a bit of a high. I was showing some good signs, played well at the right times, and all of a sudden I'm in the All Blacks. Now, this is the All Blacks you're talking about. And so you talk about being starstruck. It's the same sort of thing. The same year in 1993, I go and watch the All Blacks play Australia in Dunedin this is middle of the year, before I've even played for Otago, and I'm watching Fitzy and these guys, these superstars run around. 3 months later, I'm on tour with them. And it's the same thing. It was the cricket. I said, I got word I was going to get selected, and I'm going, surely not. You've got Sir John Kerwin, you've got Inga Tuigamala, who, tragically we've just heard today has passed away. But there was some wonderful Sir Michael Jones, just a remarkable Zinzambrook, a remarkable group of people that I've only just become in contact with. I've only just played them, and now I'm in their environment, having to pull on the All Black jersey. We're going on tour to the other side of the world. I haven't been to the other side of the world. I haven't been to the Northern Hemisphere. So this is just it was a mind-blowing experience, and all of a sudden it was if I thought there was an element of pressure in and around playing for the Black Caps or playing for New Zealand like cricket in early 93, this was another level altogether. All of a sudden this is the All Blacks you're talking about here, and their legacy, as one of the greatest sporting teams in the world for a long, long period of time. There's just a different intensity and feeling about pulling on the black jersey and representing your country in the game that is our national game.
And so, when you were sitting in, I assume that it was Carisbrook that you were sitting in. So when you were sitting in that stadium, did you think to yourself, well, I've done cricket, wonder if I can ever go at rugby? When you were sitting there as a fan.
It's interesting as I was sitting
there. As a young 19-year-old man.
Yeah, exactly. And as I'm sitting there watching this, and, I'd gone to play club rugby in Dunedin, and Gordon Hunter was the coach of Otago at the time. And it's one of the great things about living down south is you keep very, very grounded. But by the same time, at that point, did I think, it would be great to be an All Black? Like, I'd had an experience and taste in terms of I'd been to in the old days, they used to have the All Black trials, right? And so they almost got to the point too where they ran 2 All Black trials. And I'd been on the back of playing for Southland in the 2nd division. I'd been given an opportunity to play in the lesser of the 2 All Black trials. But at that point, that trial was about playing. I was playing with Grant Fox. So he was already in the All Blacks. He was guaranteed to get in there. But it was sort of like a learning experience. So I was rooming with Grant Fox as an 18-year-old. And I'd sort of, so all of a sudden, you'd sort of been in this conversation of, okay, where could rugby go to, and comparing yourself against the guys who'd been there and done that. And so for me, there was a feeling of, did I ever think I'd be an All Black? No, Blake. But by the same token, I was a competitor. I wanted to go out there and give it a crack. I love to win. I love to have success, and I loved the way that we played down in Dunedin. So I felt that brought out the best in me as a player. And that's credit to the players and the coaching staff, that it enabled me to go out there and show what I was capable of. And it just happened to be, the right time for, they were looking for a change in the All Blacks and something different. And I was maybe that. And we see that all the time now, right? There's just so much talent. It's very much what's happened over the last 30 years is that there's always someone new, there's always someone better, there's the next rock star, and it's about giving them an opportunity. And so for me, when I'm sitting in the stand at Carisbrook as I'm watching this test match, I'm not even thinking about being out there, but by the same token, I knew there might be an opportunity to go out and show what I could do.
Right. And so you're one of the only players left to be in the amateur and then professional era. So how was that switching between the 2 eras? Was that really difficult?
It wasn't difficult because it was all new for everybody, and it was a real there was a lot happened over that time in terms of the future of the game in New Zealand. And so we were at the start of Super Rugby, and that's a commitment I wanted to make to New Zealand rugby, and I was a part of that. But all of a sudden we're getting paid. All of a sudden we're traveling around playing the game. We're training more. We're just learning about our responsibilities as athletes. and what is high performance, and what more do we have to do for sponsors? What does it do for advertising? What does it do for television? It was just a huge learning curve, but by the same time, it was incredibly exciting. And so, for me, of course, I wanted to be a professional athlete. I'm a American sports fan, and particularly the NBA and basketball. And you're just looking at it and going, look, we want to be a part of something that's special and that is entertaining. And I'll be honest with you, Blake, that to me is if I look back on all of the things and across that whole time, is whether it was amateur or professionalism, we went out there. For the love of the game never changed. The way we wanted to play the game never changed. It was, and like I say, whether that was the environment I was playing in, but that's what the start of Super Rugby was. It was run and guns, tries galore. It was really fun to be a part of, and so it was incredibly motivating. But also there were challenges along the way, and there was a transition that was challenging, not just to us as provincial players, but for the All Blacks as well.
No, you have to help me with this bit because I can't find that date on the timeline for that. But it would later turn out that you wouldn't be the only person in the Wilson family to play professional sport.
Yeah, so obviously Adine, are you talking of that?
Yes, yeah. So at what part of your career did you end up meeting her and, doing that sort of thing?
But that sort of thing you're talking about, I know what you're talking about, and that's to be honest, Dunedin was a unique place to live and play, and so there was a real connection between the people down there, and Adine was down there playing netball. This is in 1999, and so we met through a specific. It was actually, in those days, you used to have bye weeks. And so the Highlanders on their bye week, we used to have an annual get-together party. And it just happened to be on this party it was an Islanders night where our manager and all his wisdom invited the local netball team as well, the Rebels, to come along. And so there was a few matches made in heaven, to be fair, and that's where I met Adine. But even then, for a netball as well, it hadn't quite got to that point where it was professional. It started to grow, and so through the late 90s and early 2000s, we sort of shared this relationship where we were both sort of trying and playing at the highest level and dealing with the pressures. Adine was studying at the same time as well as playing for the Silver Ferns. And look, incredibly fortunate. We've created a fantastic life together, and sport brought us together, and it's sort of been it's kept us together in some ways. But we've got a couple of fantastic kids, and a couple of boys who can be a handful, but they're growing up really fast. But it was, if I look back at all the things, and I've said this before, and of all the most important things that happened to me is through sport, I've been able to meet Adine and meet my wife, and so, that life post sport has been more rewarding than my time as a sportsman, and so I just look at that side of the way things have turned out, and I'm just so grateful that she ended up being such a huge part of my life.
And maybe down the track we can get her to join in the future interview. We might be able to get her to join us and talk about some of her career highlights. But for now, and I will say this now, I apologize to the viewers. I didn't mean for that question to come out the way it did.
No, that's quite all right. People understand, Blake. I think they understand. I'd like for you to interview her separately, because then you can get her point of view and her perspective, and then we can see whether or not it's the same.
So, cheap plug. Look out for that on a future episode here on the channel. But anyway, so from the in between the professional and amateur era, you were part of, and we have to treat this one lightly as well, you were part of one of the most infamous Rugby World Cup scandals in history. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Which one? Which World Cup are we going here?
95.
Oh, 95. Because I've tried to block 99 out.
We'll
Look,
get to
95 was a
the
remarkable.
whole food poisoning scandal, you know.
What scandal? What scandal? Don't you be starting any rumours here. Look, you know, I get often I have to talk about this often, and this is just a reality of, you know, when you say food poisoning, was there food poisoning? I don't think there was any poisoning. Was there a case of us suffering from a bad batch of something? Absolutely. And did it affect our performance? Absolutely. Were we still good enough to win on the day? Absolutely. But reality was it wasn't meant to be. And, you know, for us as a group and the disappointment of not being able to lift that trophy after what was a magnificent Rugby World Cup, where we felt as though in some ways, that was the start of the professional era just before we actually turned professional. And that group of players, you know, will be like I, who are disappointed that we never quite were able to. I suppose it's hard to live down, because when you know that you played the best type of rugby and you weren't able to on the day go out there and perform like you would, and everyone was affected in different ways. But I mean, the one thing that I've had to learn over my career is there's been some adversity, and there's no point dwelling on it. You just look to the future, and I can look back at that and go, I was really proud of the way that group played through the Rugby World Cup, proud of the way that we fought in that final, and, you know, we were, you know, millimetres away from winning it. So, you know, you can sit there and look for excuses, but we don't have any. You know, we won't say that was the reason we didn't win, because we still could have won. Look, I don't have any. You know, I don't have any regrets around that. There's more just disappointment. We weren't able to, like I say, go into that and showcase what we've been able to showcase through the course of the tournament.
And all joking aside, it wasn't, even though the media portrayed it that way, it wasn't really a scandal as such. Were you disappointed with the way that the media portrayed it at the time? Because I use the word scandal because that was what I found online, of course. But everyone knows it wasn't really actually a scandal in the real scheme of things.
Yeah.
Were you disappointed that was portrayed that way?
Not necessarily. You know, like I think in the end we've got to remember that every so often the media are always searching for something, and there were different points of view out there, and there are elements of, I suppose, the media that wanted to feed off those, that people had stories that there was possibly this involved, there was possibly that involved. You know, the stories of corruption, and, you know, I think in the end, you know, I think there's just a frustration and disappointment we weren't able to get the job done, because, you know, and that's sometimes that's just human nature. Whereas for me, it's funny. I don't dwell on these things, you know, and if, you know, all of a sudden someone will write something and it'll try and bring it back up because it's, we've seen something new. The one thing I know, Blake, is I can't change the result. 15-12. Like, that was the score. It's going to always be the score. So if I can't change it, I certainly don't buy into any conspiracy theories. It just wasn't meant to be.
You would go on to play a bunch of games for the Highlanders and Otago through various periods. What was it like being a part of the early days of Super Rugby, as it would come to be?
Look, it was remarkable. Like I said before, around that transition into the game, like it was the perfect environment for us because of the way the game was played back then. So all of a sudden, it was just run and gun. There were big, massive scores. You know, teams had more time to train, so you had more time to train. In the early days, it was sort of like you spent more time focusing on attack than defence, and so teams just went out there and their attack, as the attack grew, it took a long time for the defence to catch up. So all of a sudden, it was just the ball was flying everywhere, and the game evolved really, really quickly because you just had more time. You were dedicating more time to training and preparing, and so everyone got fitter, faster, skill sets got better, and then all of a sudden systems had to get better to counter it. And so what we saw was this transition of the game from what I think happened in the mid-90s to then the Brumbies had their run, and they sort of changed and they became prescribed, and it was just everyone had to adapt really, really quickly. And by the same token, you're getting to travel, you're getting to tour together, you're going to South Africa, you're going over to Australia on a more regular basis. So you ended up, you're in this lifestyle, not of the rich and famous, but you're now a professional athlete, great hotels, everything was just, it was fun. It was pure enjoyment. And there was not the pressure that there is now. It was, you were going out to perform and to try and win, but in the end, it wasn't like every game's a test matches, which is where we've got a bit to now, where, everyone's getting judged on everything, and, the coaches all think the next game's the most important, it's the be all and end all, and they're all looking to go to the next level. Back then, you always felt as though it was about us, it's about how we play, it's about entertainment, and it's about us really enjoying it. And there's a different pressure now, different expectations. And I'm grateful that I don't have to go through probably what these guys go through now, because it's really intense. And it wasn't as intense back then.
So you played all these games. You went to a World Cup, one more World Cup after that, and we fast forward to 2002. I hope I got this year right. And you decide that you're going to finish with rugby. And did you take a break, or did you go straight to cricket?
I just tried to transition slowly back into it, to be fair. In 2002, I was done for a number of reasons. I certainly wasn't enjoying the game as much. I had some injuries which were making it a little bit more difficult to train like I wanted to train, and I like training and preparing and working hard, and I wasn't able to do that as much in terms of a rugby sense. The game had got to the point where in 2003, England go on and win a Rugby World Cup. That was an indication of where the game had got to. It was just an all-out war up front. Defences were dominating. It certainly wasn't as much fun to play in. And so I'd lost a bit of that enjoyment. I'd lost my dad. He passed away in 1998 from a heart attack, and that was a big part of one of the reasons that, I shared my rugby career with him, in terms of the fact that he was my best mate and mentor. And so when you lose that, there was an element of enjoyment that I lost with it. So and then I thought to myself, I'm only 28. If I'm going to have a crack at something, if I'm ever going to play cricket again, now's the time for me to go. So that was a really difficult transition. All the time I'd spend in the weight room, all the time away from the game of cricket, rolling my arm over. It was a slow transition out of it, but I was done mentally and physically with rugby. It just took me a little bit of time to get back into it, and I was very fortunate to get a lot of good support, but by the same token, I had to work hard to try and get myself in cricket shape, which is vastly different to rugby shape, and that was really, really hard. It was and something I struggled with, because I'd built myself into a different type of athlete.
When you went back to the cricket in the early to mid 2000s, how did it compare to 10 years earlier when you were being at cricket the first time?
I think a lot more, same thing, there's the media and the sports media and their attention and the way that people were consuming the games, things have significantly changed. A lot of the players were similar in terms of I'd played with at junior level. So a lot of the guys that I played with, for a couple of years in and around 93, 94, I played, a little bit again in one of the off seasons. I played some games. And so a lot of those guys I played with at junior cricket were still around. The likes of your Stephen Fleming and Nathan Astle and those guys. So I'd sort of competed against them. And then this was the next step, sort of coming back. But it was definitely, it was different, because the attention in sport and the way sport was being covered it just meant it was, there was a difference to it, and for me it was different because I was just older, more mature, and been through a completely different career, and so there was just a lot of adjusting. One of the stories I tell quite often is my hardest thing was I couldn't. Cricket's a game that's played over time in a lot of in a sense. T20 hadn't really. I don't know. It was only just about to be discovered when I played and started. So there was 1-day games and there were 4-day games, and my biggest trouble was I couldn't switch off because I was used to this 80-minute zone that I'd play in, and so you were wired for 80 minutes. You're playing cricket, yeah, you got to switch on, you switch off when you're batting. You don't get in that mindset until you're actually out there. So I think for me, that was one of the biggest challenges. I just mentally I was too up. I'd get to halfway through a game on halfway through a day of a one-day game, and I'd be spent because I'm hanging on every ball. And but not every ball was relevant to me. I wasn't I wasn't batting or I wasn't bowling, and so it was just a matter of that was one of the biggest challenges as well, was this changing my mindset of what I had to go out and try and do.
I must say, your rugby information is a lot easier to get than your analyst stuff is a lot easier to get than your cricket information. So I apologise for having to ask that question indirectly because I couldn't find this information. But were you ever part of a World Cup?
No, and that's the thing. My experience with New Zealand cricket was very short for different reasons. One, I went and played rugby, and I only ever played Australia. I would like to have played somebody else. Would have been handy to play, in those times a Bangladesh or a Netherlands or someone to pad my. But I only had these brief moments, and the second time round, my body it gave out. The ankle injury I had through rugby, and to be fair, probably playing too much basketball. It got to a point where I was just in a little bit too much pain to sort of carry on bowling, and to me that's what I loved about the game. So I only got a taste of it. I do hold the record though for the longest amount of time between one-day international in history. It was like 14 years. It was absurd. It was a ridiculous number. I'm only 13 years. I can't off the top of my head. But it was a taste, and to have played with and against Shane Bond, to have faced Brett Lee, to have been smashed out of the park by Matthew Hayden, or Adam Gilchrist, or I got a taste of it. But my cricket career was certainly one that at an international level it got found out, and I doubted the second time round whether or not I was good enough to be there. But by the same token, I was grateful to get the opportunity, and I competed as best I could. But no, there was no World Cup in there, and I've loved the chance to do it, absolutely. But like you say, there's a reason you can't find much of my cricket career, because it was very brief at both ends.
How ironic that they only brought you out to get to Australia. It's almost like they wanted you for a special attraction to sell tickets for an Australian game in those days or something.
Well, I mean, let me say, I gave people the opportunity to see the best of the opposition. Let me put it that way. Let's say we go that. All right, my half volleys and to Gilchrist, and but like I say, just amazing bowling to Ricky Ponting. Ricky Ponting, I got to play in the first T20 international. It was amazing, at Eden Park. We never dreamed that would be the start of what it's become, and the way it's become the global game, and the IPLs and all of these professional leagues, and so once again, just a privilege to be an experience and to get a part of it, and to be a part of it. Did I believe at the time I was probably good enough to be there? I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you, Blake. The second time round, even the first time round, I'm not 100% sure. But it's hard to know, because probably I didn't get to play in my prime physical abilities. But in saying that, it was an amazing experience.
So as we move on to the next section, so you, after your whole boarding playing time was finished, you slowly started integration into analyst, and your wife would do that later as well. How did that come about, either for yourself or the both of you?
it's really interesting. I mean, that's what I work for Sky Television now, but to get to this point, I've done a whole lot of things. I did a whole raft of things, and so sort of quite often when you finish sport, and you find this with a lot of athletes, you're not sure where you want to go, what you want to do. For me, I bought 150. Adine and I bought 150 acres of land outside Christchurch, and I played cricket in the summer, and in the winter we grazed dairy cows and we grew grass. And so all of a sudden I became I wouldn't say farmer because that's not fair on farmers. I would say I became a hobby farmer, but at the same time I trained racehorses, trotters and pacers for a couple of years. I was doing contract coaching. There was all of these things, contract coaching at a place called Irans, which Murray Mexted had started up in New Zealand. So there's all of these experiences I was going through, and I went back and did some administration stuff for Otago Rugby for about 18 months after my career and had finished. And so I was sort of transitioning and searching for what that next thing was going to be. And I ended up coming to Auckland with Craig Dowd to coach at North Harbour. And I mean, I loved coaching. I really enjoyed it. It was a challenge. Wasn't overly successful in terms of results on the field, but in terms of committing and working hard with players and individuals, I really enjoyed all those sides of it. So there's a whole lot of great things that we could focus on. Dog's having another bite. We've got a lot of people wandering around the house today. I'm not sure what's going on, but so there's that whole transition. That's enough. Oi. So there's a whole sorry about that, Blake. There's a whole transition to becoming a coach, and so as I couldn't coach, I did a bit of work for the Blues, and so at the same time I was working with the Blues, I did some analytical work for Sky Television. Sort of invited to become a panelist, and so when you're talking about a game you love, it just sort of happens, you know. I was always the person who spoke to coaches, always, and talked about the game. You know, I've done that my whole life, whatever sport it is. And so, you know, when you're talking about something you're passionate about, you know, you can do that with confidence. And so just transitioning through coaching it and having to deliver to people and talk to people about the game and, you know, delivering to players and having to explain, it sort of lends itself to being an analyst of sport. And so that opportunity post-coaching, you know, I was at the Blues briefly with Pat Lam, and then that's when Sir John Kerwin came in, who now I'm on television with. He decided my coaching career needed to end, JK did, and that was the end of it. He went in a different direction, and that opened up a door for me to go into radio. And it was the radio that really, Blake, gave me the confidence to develop the skills to be on television, you know. So all of a sudden you're holding a conversation, you're interviewing different people. I was working with Ian Smith and Nathan Rarity, and we had a breakfast show, live sport it was, and so you worked from 6 till 10. So it was a great experience to have that depth and learn from Ian Smith. And then Sky, I'm so grateful for, gave me the opportunity to take it to another level, and it's been a long time now, and it was a learning curve, a really steep learning curve, man. It's as you know, it's when you're having to interview and chat with people and the research you have to do. It presented this opportunity for me to get on television to talk about rugby and help people understand. And now, then they started giving me a chance to host, and that was the real challenge. Is the red light goes on, there's a guy in your ear or a girl in your ear, and they're telling you how long you got to go and where you're going to. And some of the early stuff was a bit rough. But now, you know, you just get, the more you do it, like anything, as you know as well, the more comfortable you get. And, you know, I love it now. It's great.
Hey, your dog seems to be loving hearing about your career.
I don't know what she's barking at, that dog. She's doing laps of the house. I don't know what's going on. Maybe she wants some attention.
So, and as we move on to this final portion, we are going to get through it, so that's good. I didn't think we would. So, as we move on to this final portion, so you mentioned it there. You started at the break, you started doing your breakdown, and you've been to World Cups, you've been to Test matches. We'll be here all day. We go through all of them. So I'll just do highlights, Test matches, uh, World Cups. You've started the breakdown. So as you've been doing all of that stuff, do you have a highlight of all that stuff?
Oh, look, the great thing about working in the job that I've done, and like I say, I can't be grateful enough, is that all of a sudden you've kept that connection with the All Blacks, but it's the team of people I work with at Sky, and it's funny, like all of a sudden you go from being in a team when you're playing sport, it's great to feel as though you're part of something, and the team at Sky are so passionate and I believe so good at what they do, that every opportunity you get to go to work is special. Now, of course, there's some that are more special than others, and there's no doubt the 2015 Rugby World Cup, I experienced 2011 here in New Zealand, and it was hard work. We're on the edge of our seats right to the very, very end. The country's holding its breath. But 2015, being over there, watching that All Black team, that remarkable All Black team, that group of players go out and win back-to-back World Cups, and the manner they did it, to be able to be on that field and interview those players and be at that tournament was incredibly special, and to me that was almost a confirmation of the legacy of the All Blacks, and the fact that proving that when we're at our very, very best, we are the best team in the world, and that wasn't without an element of drama. And of course, we had to work hard to beat South Africa in the semi-final, but that whole experience and being there and doing that was just remarkable. And there's some other things that that are incredibly special. Was getting to go back to South Africa and experience a Test match from the other side rather than being a player.
You enjoyed
experiencing
that.
it. What's that?
You enjoyed that then?
Well, yeah, because there's a different experience of a game rather than when you're actually in and on the field. They're wonderfully respectful before the game. They love having a chat. They love their rugby, and then all of a sudden, for 80 minutes, you're the arch enemy. And then the moment they finish, the whistle's gone. It's time. Let's go and have a beer and chat about whatever it is that happened. And they're so hospitable, but there's a competitiveness and a respect that's there, and so you just get to. And you get to experience the way that they celebrate the game, which is well and truly before and for a long time afterwards. It's a huge event, and it's something we in New Zealand can learn from, about how we can celebrate the game for not just the 80 minutes, not just the hour and a half. It's a day event, and so I think and then you've got wonderful stadiums in France and Paris and at Twickenham and Murrayfield, all of these things that. I feel as though it's just different. And so when you're going on tour with that group, with those group of people, and with those players, and being there, experience it, it's remarkable. And now, like I say, to have a show to talk about the game, to work with Sir John Kerwin and Mills Muliaina, and with Marshy and with Izzy, and these I think great people. With Nisbo and TJ, it's just a wonderful group, and I think that like we all say, you want to have a passion for what you do, and I certainly have a passion for that.
Yeah, but I'm just doing it for me. You were asking earlier about getting information, so for me, I'm just doing a bit of this, a bit of freelance at the moment. Just a bit of a hobby that I got into during lockdown, that I've now decided that I want to have a crack at with the whole YouTube and stuff like that. And so I'm just, the hardest thing I've found, and I don't know if you had this problem, so I wanted to ask you. The hardest thing I found for me is I'm a really social person. I love going to, ironically, sports matches and functions and, outings with family, friends, etc., etc. But the hardest thing I found the early part of doing this, is building up the courage to reach out to people. And that's what I found the hardest. But I've found as the weeks have gone by, it has gotten easier and easier and easier, because in the early part, a few months ago, and I still do this now, I would sweat, writing the messages, you know, because you worry, oh, am I saying the right thing? I hope I don't pester them too much. I don't want to put them off, that sort of thing. So that's the bit I found the hardest. So when your team and you, because I don't know whether you have any input in this, are organising people to come on your shows, do you get the same sort of feeling like you get nervous reaching out to who you want, even if they're not a regular, like maybe an Australian player or South African player or something to that degree?
I think like I mean, and this is where, and it's very much, it's a challenge now for everyone, is understanding what it is that we're responsible for, and I take it we're responsible for as a former player, and is helping people understand the game and understand why the game's great. And so when you're reaching out to people, you'll be surprised that most people get it. Most people, and the ones you want to talk to understand that not only not only are they blessed to have had their opportunity, but also now they've got a responsibility. And so, do you get nervous about it? What's the worst they can say? It's no. And you go, well, that's fine. That's what's the worst they can say is, and you just put yourself out there, and quite often we have players who don't want to speak or don't feel comfortable, and you offer them the opportunity, but for me, I think in general now, players do understand, and people do understand their responsibilities in this, is to help promote the game, is to give people an element of entertainment, understand what the game is like for them, and understand what it's like for the players now. And you're right. Sometimes picking up their phone and ringing a person, and you're going, but I understand, and they should understand. Like, I know everyone's heart's in the right place, right? You're not trying to dig up dirt on anybody. You're literally going out there to tell a story. And that's what we need to tell about our games, to tell about rugby, cricket, basketball, netball, whatever sport it might be, the Olympics. Because the more stories we can tell, the more people can get closer to those sports and experiences. And like I say, one of the greatest things, and I always talk about it, what was the thing I enjoyed most about, when I played, is that I felt as though I put a smile on people's faces. Sometimes when it was the opposition fans, maybe not. They're not obviously overly happy. But I think the big thing for me is that you want people to be happy, and for a moment, if it means they forget about something they don't want to talk about or hear about, they've got a moment to enjoy what you're doing. And I'm sure, whoever it is you speak to, Blake, they will provide information and entertainment and give a little bit of insight. And I think that's why you should just that's what we're here to do. That's why I love doing these sorts of things.
And I'm finding that as I'm reaching out to more and more people, my connection tree is going more. Now, as we wrap up here, there are some phenomenal players out right now. How impressed have you been with the current crop of players like Rico Ioane and his brother? You've got Will Jordan. You've got again Jordie Barrett, as we talked about at the beginning. So many great players, and so many great players coming through as well. I've just been impressed how we seem to be one of the only countries, and not bragging here, that seem to keep producing.
Yeah, it's a. I mean, I think that there's some unique things that make teams great, and talent has never been an issue in New Zealand. What we're seeing globally, though, I think what we're seeing is how other countries are developing their talent as well. They are finding better talent. They are finding better athletes. They're creating better athletes. And for so long, we've set that standard. And where do I see this crop right now? I see this crop as being as talented as anybody else, but searching for that next level of being the best team. And that's the challenge, is that we've got to find a way to bring the right group of players together. And that's why when I talk about 2015 and 2011, that group, which grew, remembering, from some disappointment from 2007 to become a great All Black era. We've got the talent and ability. It's just up to us now to bring that. And I think a lot of this is on the players themselves, is for them to come together and find that little bit extra that that your superstar players need to, which they've done in the past, and through that great era we had. The talent's there. We've just got right now, and I don't think COVID's helped. We all know this, how it's the continuity and the uncertainty and the ability to adapt, all those things we've had to do differently has sort of, I think, stopped us becoming a great team just yet. But the great players you talked about are there. The hardest thing sometimes, Blake, is working out where everyone fits, because we do have multiple people in multiple positions, and in the end, talent's one thing. It's definitely helpful, but you've got to have that something special as a group, and through leadership, that'll be the difference between this team being a good All Black side and being a great All Black side.
No, I'll ask you to just stick there for a moment after, but do you have any closing comments you would like to say to the people that may be watching?
I love having a chat. It's been great to yarn and talk about. My memory's not as good as it used to be because it's just been a long, long time. But, I think, like I said before, sport's just a wonderful way to bring people together. And I think sometimes we maybe take it a little bit too seriously, but that brings out the best in people. And, for me, I just hope people see rugby for what it is. It is a great game that's played by some tremendous athletes, and at times it can be there's elements that are frustrating, but just keep watching, and it's the same for cricket as well. We've just got some remarkable athletes in this country. It's a remarkable cricket team right now. I think our greatest ever era of New Zealand cricket, and so we should celebrate that. Celebrate, what we get to enjoy on a yearly basis.
Well, thank you for coming on today, Jeff. It's been a real pleasure to talk, listen to your stories and speak to you, ask you some great questions. To the viewers, I will say goodbye and catch you next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell on this video. And stay with me just there, Jeff.